Hi, my name is Jay Oza. I teach, mentor, and coach people on public speaking so that they can give winning high stakes speeches, whether it's one on one, in a job interview, or in a small group, in a business meeting, or in front of a large audience at a conference. I want to talk about this book that I just finished reading. It's not a new book, it's been out there for a while. It's the book that Sheryl Sandberg wrote called Lean In. And I have to tell you, I think it's a must reading, not only for women, but men especially. It was an eye opener. Now, I work and my wife works, and I had never given a lot of things that she brought up in that book, uh, which I think should be a must reading before men and women get married. Because one of the first things that she points out is how do you divvy up the housework? That's something I had never even given any thought to when I got married. It's just like it just worked, right? And it never bothered. I never bothered to even think how it was affecting my wife. And after reading that book, I'm like, wow, I never even thought about some of the things. She comes from work and suddenly she has to cook, she has to do some housework, all of that stuff. I do a lot of that today. Maybe not well, but I do it. So my wife is obviously happy. But I think that I have a daughter, and I would tell her that before you get married, you and your fiance or your boyfriend should read this book together, because the first thing you need to agree upon, love is great and everything, but at some point you will get married and then things change. Well, the first thing is, how do you divvy up the work? This book allows you to have that discussion. Like, let's say he works and she works. When you come home, who's responsible for what? This is a good way to have that discussion before you get married, because a lot of the problems start right there. I used to think that work was work and what you did at home were separate. After reading this book, I realized they're not. They're really kind of tied, because your work is affected by your home life. The so called balance, right? Well, there is no real balance. You got to learn how to manage it. But if your home life isn't good, it's going to affect your work life. And if your work is not going well because your home life, it's going to then affect your home life and could lead to all kinds of problems. And perhaps you can get burned out or possibly even get sick. So it's very important, if before you get married, if anybody's single out there, both men and women, to read this book together. So the first is, right after you get married, this is going to happen immediately. How do you divvy up the work? The second thing, which will take a little longer, is when you start having children. How do you divide the responsibilities for that? These are not easy questions. When they come up, you're not ready for it, but it's important to have this discussion early on. And one thing I'll tell you is that don't read this book somehow to like learn some tips and techniques. And she has a lot of them in there that'll, make you stand out at work and do all that. But I think the part that is really, really was an eye opener for me is that this book is almost like a prenup reading. Before you get married, you sign a little prenuptial. One of the requirements should be, I think, is for couples to read this book together so that you can avoid or at least learn to manage those things before it happens. Like I said, house responsibilities. And then when you have children, how do you deal with that? So, my suggestion is, if you are single, whether you're male or female, take some time, buy this book, buy two of them, one for yourself, one for your significant other, read it together, and have a discussion around it. And after that discussion, if you feel like you both have a real good understanding on what the future is going to look like together, then definitely get married. But don't get married without reading this book, because a lot of the stuff that Sheryl Sandberg talks about is going to happen. And it's not going to be fun if you haven't already talked about it and know how to manage it, because everybody's going to go through this. But if you have already talked about it and know how to deal with it, then I think you're going to have a very good marriage and life. Okay, so read this book and see what you think, and let me know. Thank you.